What would I want like a socialist society to be like? I think the best case scenario would you'd have maybe like 2 or 3 parties where they're both committed to a general consensus to building a socialist project or a post-capitalist project. Let's say you have the Liberal Socialist Party, the Conservative Socialist Party, and they squabble over these issues, but they will make deals and concessions on like an overarching project. Meanwhile, billionaires and rich people are excluded, from being members of parliament and from donations and stuff like that from big media corporations, all kind of ways you can tackle the rich. But that's, I think, the way to deal with it. What I've been skeptical of is this idea of like one party being able to enforce like the correct ideas, because sometimes it'll work, sometimes it'll be terrible. Like with dictatorships, it's really a roll of the dice. Sometimes you can be blessed, most of the time you won't, and most of the time, even when they're good, they'll end up being shit eventually. You know?
Yeah, yeah. If you can standardize it properly and like institutionalize it to an extent, where different, we can call them political parties, obviously, where they are still under the umbrella of the system that they support, that all of them support, but quabble when it comes to social issues. It would be a much more transparent model on addressing particular social issues and democratizing the ability for people to voice their opinion on average when it comes to particular social issues. I completely agree with what you're saying. Is like that's one of my favorite works of yours, like unironically. The division of power inside of a socialist system, which is absolutely necessary. Because a lot of communists tend to like immediately like seize up and become defensive when it comes to the conversation of division of power. And I'm sure you've seen this a lot more than me, because they're immediately associating it with the meme of division of power inside of a capitalist system. This is methodology. This is a tool which obviously is used to cover up for the inadequacies of capitalism inside of capitalism proper, but which would very much so be used properly as a tool inside of a working class society.
It's to divide the powers of capitalists too,
Yeah, yeah,
because they
yeah,
don't want capitalism wouldn't work as well if one capitalist faction dominated all the rest.
yeah. Absolutely.
But in a socialist society, you would want still a division of powers,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
else like it's the risk of that party being, very out of touch with the people. And Mao thought that all of them, like Mao, Trotsky, like much of the communists acknowledge that. Just the thing is that I think their solutions failed. Like Mao thought you can just throw a bunch of bodies, like a cultural revolution, a bunch of students at the party, and that will maybe challenge them. But that didn't really work.
Mm.
Disagreement is natural. The more you look at contradictions,
And there should be absolutely,
yeah, this is
absolutely.
dialectics. So literally,
Yep.
it's working through contradiction. There's this idea of like, you're either a friend or enemy. And the thing is like,
Bullshit.
for us, it's kind of easy to see that despite small, maybe very small disagreements, it's overall allies,
Yeah.
completely. Like, it's kind of why some people have asked, like, oh, why am I friendly with the Deprogram even though I'm not an ML? It's like, well, I view them as allies generally.
Have I ever in my life said that I'm an ML? Like, there you go. Like it.
Well,
There you go again.
yeah, you have a
Generalization.
kind of crazy subreddit. Like,
Okay, we don't run the subreddit as
yeah, I
fanboy.
know. Yeah.
That's another one of my favorite fucking pet peeves. Absolute pet peeves of the at least online left. Oh fuck it, I live for it. I live for it.
You're listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.
We think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite. Like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are.
When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Philosophers call someone a relativist, by which they mean it's a person that holds that any view is as good as any other view. My simple response to that is this: no one holds that view. No one believes that every view is as good as every other view.
Welcome to One Dime Radio. Today, I am here with a very, very special guest, Yugopnik. You might remember him either because you watch his channel, or if you've been around for a very, very long time, you might remember that Yugopnik was one of the very first guests.
OG shit!
One of the very first guests on One Dime Radio. Way back when I was an amorphous logo and you were a Wojak.
A Wojak, bro. Holy shit. I don't know what's worse, a fucking Wojak or a masked up dude on the internet. It's like I'm the king of zero aesthetic consistency, okay? I do everything in my power to disenfranchise people from listening to what I have to say through my aesthetic, right? First a Wojak, now fucking ski mask guy. It's like the pinnacle of I cannot take this guy seriously, but I can't help but produce incredibly base shit. And people still take me seriously, even though I look like this. So, or Emma Wojak, you know? What's up, man? Very, very good.
Man. Most LeftTube dresses up in clown costumes anyway. So ski
This is
mask,
just
gangster,
dude, this is just how most Balkan people like walk around in the street, anyways. Like it's this is my work attire, you know.
Yeah, I think your Wojak did it have like the Adidas track pants or something?
No, I didn't go that far. My name, Yugopnik, was supposed to make fun of, stereotypes that people have towards Slavs in general. So Yugo, like ex-Yugoslavia area, and Gopnik, the stereotype about, Slavs just being downtrodden criminals that want to rob you in the street and that, beat their wives, etc., etc. And a lot of some of the first videos that I made were pretty much directed at questioning that very particular stereotype people had about Slavs. So my name was stereotypical intentionally to get people to click that just want like stereotypical Slav content, and then to see that we are not that either much of a monolith or on one side, on the other side we are not what you tend to think of us as. Except that one meme where they're like a typical Balkan couple, and it's the dude from Family Guy next to like a Barbie doll, right? That stereotype is correct, but that stereotype is supposed to make fun of Balkan dudes because we all look absurd while our women look fantastic. But to the people like encouraging this stereotype, which is a relatively correct stereotype, I say improve your fucking game. If Balkan dudes can look like fucking Family Guy and still score baddies, what is your motherfucking excuse, you Scandinavian or British or French motherfucker, okay? If we can have long-running, beautiful, successful, loving relationships looking like Family Guy, then you have no excuses either. So I take it as a badge of honor. Like most Balkan guys are so rizzed up, so fucking peak aura.
Same with French dudes.
That they can score anything. Same with French dudes to an extent. Like
French
most French
dudes
dudes have guts, like massive guts, and yet they have like a
and they're all
dime next to
short.
them.
French
One
dudes
dime
are
up.
really short.
They're fucking tiny. Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
To me,
and it's like
everybody's tiny. Yeah.
French dudes got crazy game.
They
That's
do.
certified. That's
But
certified.
they play, but come on, but they play like the opposite that the stereotype about like a Slavic dude is that he's gonna beat you, he's gonna be super misogynist, he's not gonna let you, he's gonna feel uneasy based on your career development, etc., etc. So everything is against a Slavic dude scoring. While the French dude can just be like a little fucking idiot, sometimes even misogynist, but he uses that accent. He travels to the United States or to anywhere outside of Europe, and he's just scoring because he's French. But he might be much worse than your statistically average Slavic dude, but he scores because of the positive stereotype. The Slav has to grind above the stereotype, as they say. So it's a different game, but it still works. Yeah, they do well.
I actually looked that up the other day. I was like, was there like more or less I actually asked ChatGPT deep research. I was like, was there more or less incels in the Soviet countries and the Eastern Bloc countries? 'Cause I was kind of like, I'd read Christian Gosna's, why women have better sex under socialism or whatever. And yeah, I wanted to see, and it's like, well, the word didn't exist back then, but apparently like the marriage ratio was way more even. And there was just like the vast majority of people got married whereas it was more common in Western countries for like a lot of people to just be kind of locked out of that, whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, the stereotype of Eastern Europeans, not all of the stereotypes are true, and certainly, saying etc. is not an Eastern European stereotype. That's a Yugopnik stereotype. You know,
True. Very true. Very true. And so
but
on and
yeah,
so on. I don't want to do the and so on and so on. I do etc. etc. It's an eternal classic. There's even like the weirdest ideological spin I've ever seen coming from my part of the world is what some call post feminism, but not from the perspective of like shit like post left or any of that stuff, but the idea that a lot of women adapt to an understanding which is the following: we are the only place, arguably, on planet Earth where women reached some sort of, to an extent, obviously, equilibrium with men because of the previous socialist experiments and so on. And a lot of daughters of like highly, highly successful, highly, highly educated women saw that whole thing and they were like, nah, I'm good. I would prefer to be, a housewife or, just marry rich, etc., from the not from the perspective of, we are right now in capitalism. You got to grind whatever way you can in order to rip yourself out. But because of quite literally having seen the experiences of a hardworking woman, and because of that saying, I'm good. That type of like post feminist. It's a very strange interpretation, to an extent honest. I respect it because it is honest and because it is so like bubbled. Like this is the niche of a niche of a niche. It's
doesn't seem
interesting.
that niche to me. That's a whole other
Mhm.
topic. I mean,
You
the
think so?
the
Maybe.
well, I mean, it's because like feminism under capitalism just means women have to,
Yeah.
take two jobs instead of one. So it's like now you're not just taking care of kids. It's like you're also, encouraged to be a careerist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's why people are having less kids. People wonder why the fucking birth rates are all going down. It's like, well, duh, it's pretty
Absolutely.
impossible to have children. I don't know. I'm with the like wages for housework feminism. Like there's the kind of other feminism which is like let's like not like having kids is oppressive on women. It's like
What the
I don't
fuck?
know.
Yeah.
I think that's stupid as hell. Like the whole antinatalism, not a fan of
Is
it.
absurd. Is absurd. Is
Yeah.
absurd. I mean, that's one of those things that is supposed to happen relatively organically if you are dating or married to a man that respects you as I'm talking about straight cis relationships, right? A man that actually treats you as a person, not constantly bubbling you into the category of a woman. Just organically, he is supposed to click with the fact that you do if that's the type of relationship you're in, right? If you're doing more housework or if you're taking care of the kids or the fact that you gave birth to motherfucking children, 9 months plus time off work to take care of the kid, plus everything that comes with being a mother, etc. One would expect in a healthy society that not to even be a thing to comment on. Like of course, like you're supposed to get as much when it comes to the financial benefits, if not even more, than the man in the particular relationship, even though he might be making more money and he's making more money because, patriarchy and because, you were fucking off work for like 2 years because you had to carry the child and, bring it to term, blah, blah, blah. Like to me, like when I even listening to conversations by either people in my, IRL circle or somewhere online in these like unhinged fucking Twitter threads, I'm genuinely confused because I'm like, isn't this like, as a woman, why the fuck would you date a motherfucker that, or marry him, or give him kids who is not just organically clicking with this, with the fact like you are contributing both to the family and to the relationship so much through the fact that you happen to be a woman, especially under the context of kids, that like this is not supposed to even be a conversation. Of course, you deserve extra, extra, extra on top as compared to the to the dude in a relationship because you are both living in a patriarchy induced capitalism, blah blah blah, all the nerd shit, but also because like
Yeah,
you
after
spend
that,
so much time with a kid.
I noticed you say you have we can get into this in another conversation, maybe in the back room later.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I feel like sometimes when we talk about capitalism, we feel like the need to say also like patriarchy and intersectionality, but I feel like these are kind of outdated terms, and it depends on where you're using them. Like in
Okay.
some countries, that's very apt still.
Yep.
However, in like some Western countries, I think the remnants of patriarchy that still exist is really just in the corporate world and high finance, and that is at that point like, why not just say capitalism instead of patriarchy?
I agree.
Because that's like the only way to address the problem. Because everywhere else there really isn't patriarchy. Like at the level of if you look at like education, there's now even more women than men. If you look at manager, you could say like middle class professional managerial jobs, it's pretty even. You could say even women are kind of out competing men in the labor market. This is, I think, part of a cause of the resentment among men. And also you have like even in law, right? In law, like a big portion of judges now are like women. Like it's pretty even there too. The level of representation in government, it's becoming, the gap is closing. Yeah, I think we're emerging. We already, I would say, in the West is post patriarchal world, but like as a result, there's still like patriarchal attitudes. And I
Yep.
think people confuse sexism with patriarchy. Like
Yep.
sexism is an
Mhm.
attitude. Patriarchy is like women are being dependent on men.
Yep.
You know what
It's
I mean?
systemic. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like, some country, it's like it's a spectrum, I think. But there's this book on it I found very interesting from this like French former Marxist historian called Emmanuel Todd.
Hmm.
Very interesting thinker who wrote this book that I'm reading called Lineages of the Feminine History of Women. And it's about like some of the paradoxes we encounter today. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
whole other thing. It's a whole other debate just because
It is.
the
We
way
go.
in which,
We
yeah.
gotta be absolute assholes when it comes to people talking about intersectionality in general, who do not at some point bring it back to capitalism being the let's call it the source, the well of all of the issues that they might be talking about when it comes to ethnicity, race, or gender, or et cetera, et cetera. Like on this particular topic, I agree with you completely. I am very, very, very radical. Even though one could make an argument, especially looking at like past socialist experiments or whatever the fuck, where you did have hardcore fucking bigotry, even though it was a post quote unquote capitalist system. But then you can debate that by saying that there were remnants of ideologically induced hatred between particular ethnicities or bigotry towards different demographics of people, which were not properly addressed by the socialist movement and were sometimes even used in a reactionary manner while developing their idea, let's call it, of a socialist system. So it does always come back to the issue of
Right.
not economics, of course. This is very simplistic, idiotic, or
I,
whatever.
I
Like,
will honestly,
yeah. Mhm.
for
Uh,
materialism, I think it kind of does though.
it
Because I mean, even like if you look at why women's rights became a thing, even in the capitalist countries, like because the Soviet Union, right,
yeah.
was ahead on all those issues before, on the women's issues, but then it wasn't until like capitalism had to like go into service economy and be like, okay, well, we need to like have women exploit themselves more.
Yeah. Yep.
So you get in the workforce. It's why like Japan, like ultra patriarchal, was like, okay, women in the workforce, go, go, go. Even though like they weren't exactly all about women's empowerment, but then you get empowerment that way in a certain way, right? I would say it's limited. It's very limited. It's kind of where
I
I think like under capitalism, sometimes feminism becomes divisive. That's why I'm like very strongly pro the prolefems, right? The proletarian
Of
feminists.
course. Yep.
And
I
the kind of
agree.
others, the other kind, I think, is almost like at this point like a big source of culture war distraction, frankly.
I agree completely. The reason I said that, I made fun of, it's just
Well,
economics. At the end of the day, like that's the crux. It is. It unironically is. But even during a period of revolution or even post-revolution, call it whatever you want, there needs to be an active process of addressing reactionary sentiments that existed in the past. Because you can have a quote unquote dictatorship of the proletariat, but then you can have a state that defines by themselves who the proletariat is, informed on reactionary sentiments that existed in the past. But if you let it run for long enough, Just because you are not in capitalism, those contradictions are going to end up disappearing 100%. But for the first 100, 200, probably 300 years, etc., if you don't want them to continue, you got to address them to an extent head on, right? That's just the unfortunate
Well,
minus of evolving out of a system that has informed our culture, our way of looking at each other, etc., so much that even post-revolution, those things will need to be addressed, because it's not going to be a click, right? It's not everyone is immediately going to be like, "Ooh, we're just all chill dudes of the working class, and we all love each other. It doesn't matter if I'm Balkan or you're Lebanese or Canadian or American or fucking German, etc." So all I'm saying is the process of actively addressing contradictions that we have accepted as just nature coming out of a capitalist system needs to be an active process. That's it.
there's all kind of things that could go into, but I think we're jumping in the gun a little bit with, all this dictatorship of the proletariat stuff. This is very at the end of the, I guess you could say the spectrum, the pipeline, dare I say. And speaking of that, someone who's been swimming very deep in the waters of radical left politics for quite a long time, I feel, I've as I got at the end of the so-called funnel, I came quite critical of a lot of things. That's natural of any movement. You need to have some kind of self-critique, or just if you want to
Of
question
course.
things as a thinker. But before we jump the gun on those big questions, what happens after? I think the main thing I was going to talk to you about is this idea of the leftist pipeline, because you have a video. It's actually one of your most popular videos, right? Where you talk about
Oh.
like LeftTube and like the funnel theory as you have it.
Mhm.
I'll let you explain it, but no, basically, like, what is this leftist pipeline, and do you think it's still true? Because I've noticed some people in your community are kind of critical of it, but for some reasons that might be different from the way I'm critical of it. Just because I would just say, like, outright, I guess some people I've noticed critique the idea because they don't think that it leads to the right funnel. For me, I'm critical of the idea of like radicality necessarily meaning gooder. Do you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
Better in the sense of like the thing about radical is like it can also just be a style. So this
Yes,
is
it
like the
can.
whole
Yeah.
60s leftism thing. Ever
Mhm.
since really the 60s, there's a lot of stuff that looks radical, but it's just like it's kind of a posture. Like, or is it productive? Like, I don't know, the Weather Underground were like probably the most radical group in America. I don't think they were particularly the most successful compared to like, I don't know, Eugene Debs,
Mhm.
right? Who might be a little less. So yeah, anyway, that's just, do you still think like the pipeline is a thing today? And what were you trying to really do with the video back when you
It,
made it?
it like first we gotta address like what is the definition of more radical when it comes to my theory of digital content creators. Let's call it what it is, trying to push people towards a particular ideology. The most radical you can get, like the end of the pipeline. You know what it was defined by actually organizing, by actually going out, like either joining an org, starting an org, doing community organization, all of the shit that I can now list out for like 10 minutes, but I'm not going to. So the definition of winning with the funnel was unironically getting out of the funnel. It was consuming this and this and this and this type of content up until you reach the bottom of the funnel, where you have actual educators, let's call them that motivate you to stop consuming just for the sake of consuming content, stop stylizing yourself, as you like beautifully put, etc., just a leftist, or like the most radical leftist that is more radical than the other guy because I'm a MLM, and you're just an MLM, etc. So that was the intention with it, pretty much. As you go through the funnel by consuming this type of content and another type of content and then different type of, let's call them, creators, eventually you're supposed to be pooped out by said funnel. It's completely informed by my previous like corporate experience when it comes to marketing, because what is the whole point of propagandizing someone? when it comes to selling a physical product or a service. It's about them actually buying it, right? Or them paying a subscription fee for a service. When it comes to doing marketing for the left, it's extremely problematic, and I agree completely because it's such a broad context. The product slash service that you want them to buy is actually be grass touching IRL leftists. That's it. So from that perspective, I completely still stand by the funnel. From another perspective, I wanted to build out a template, literally just a template. Some of the names that I put in particular parts of the funnel, etc., etc. All of this is open to critique, and it should greatly be critiqued. But the idea of off the funnel as a methodology used to bring people from sitting in the room and ideologically masturbating to actually doing something, I stand with 100% of my soul. I genuinely believe that it is a proven fact that is how both ideological education and on the other side, what do you call it? Just marketing for the sake of marketing, of selling a product works. That's how we operate. So yeah, TLDR, radicalizing is simple method, like it's just a word that means eventually getting you out of the funnel, out of consuming anything. You can still consume for entertainment or for education, etc., but to actually get you out on the streets. And the way funnels work, completely stand by it. But I'm super open to obviously people making it more complex, etc. The main people, arguably the only people that I criticize in said funnel are, the ones that are the tumors that are actively sabotaging said funnel.
Like cancellations of each other or unnecessary beefs and dramas.
Exactly, like those people are in it for the cash, for the money, for the popularity, etc. They are not actively contributing to any sort of funnel. They're just there in order to build up an audience and grow their Patreons, grow their Twitch subscribe counts or whatever, etc. And they are quite literally motivated by the profit motive, the very motive that they criticize, to not allow people to get out of their stage of the funnel or the funnel in general, because they don't like, they're informed by capitalism. They don't want you to organize. They don't want you to spend any time that you have outside of watching their shit, interacting with them on Discord, paying more,
Yeah,
etc.
stealing market share from other people, being like,
That as well.
this person is not radical enough. This person is, this person is actually CIA, whatever,
Yeah. And
Yeah,
everybody
so-
does this. Like, it was just so in case the audience might misunderstand me. Like, this is not, for example, throwing only shade at, like, sotsdems. This is also throwing shade at,
I think it's I think it's the word. I think it's
MLs and so on.
actually.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's honestly more the case with some of the more radical types sometimes, because
It is, yeah.
I
and
might
fuck 'em,
might
and
write a
fuck 'em.
Substack
Yeah.
article called the opportunist grifter and the LARP and radical LARPers, kind of like in that
Yeah, and you should.
they do
Yeah.
a similar thing, like they both kind of, it's opportunism, but the thing about like what I say radical LARPing is like there's a kind of real profitability to that too. It's just in the sense that you can't really get mass appeal that way, but it's easier to like, this is a cult phenomenon, right? That's how people build cults, which is, you insulate people. It's like, follow me in, my cult of personality. And it's also like, that it's a market share thing, because if you can position yourself as the most radical, it's like the hipster phenomenon,
Yeah.
the rest of the stuff's mainstream,
Yeah. You're Hassan and you're selling hot dogs, right? So you can sell hot dogs to fucking millions of people, but a hot dog is cheap, right? But if you're a hardcore fucking principled, regurgitations, you're selling fucking gold infused patty burgers. Motherfucking thing costs like $700, right? But you sell it, of course, you only sell it to 5 people, to 7 people, to 700 people. Hassan is going to sell, for example, 70,000 hot dogs, and he's still going to make more money than you. But understanding that you're not a good hot dog seller or whatever, you still sell the same meat. You still, to an extent, sell it in the same patty, but you infuse it with the gold-plated radicalism, as you beautifully put, and you sell it to less people, but you sell it at a more premium price. It's completely grifter economy, like from every fucking perspective. They just know that they're not going to have a mass appeal, or they from the get-go don't want mass appeal. They're in it for the fucking cash, so they make themselves niche because niche also sells. That's why the criticism from niche people towards those who are trying to that are at the top of the funnel, that are trying to do mass appeal, is always like, oh, you're not principled enough. Oh, you're not. Blah, 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 blah. That's exactly why in the funnel I talk about humor specifically. You having open, accepting hands and educating at the ground level, at the beginning level, is a very fucking good thing. The only point in which it can be fucked up when you have a large audience is if you're saying that if anybody chooses to go down the funnel, quote unquote, radicalize, etc., then that's bad. Like, remain a Sotsdem, remain a Norwegian model guy, etc. That's when you become a tumor. But if you're introducing people and then allowing them to progress, then it's based as shit. That's the only fucking argument. That's it.
Well, so this is okay. So this where I'll tell you where we agree and where we disagree.
Okay.
So I agree that in the sense of like the beginning of a funnel, of getting people who have no exposure to this stuff at all, it is useful to have the most, I would say, streamlined approach. Like probably from people I've encountered, the people who seem to have first encountered left YouTube is through JT, Second Thought, and Hassan. Like those are really like the biggest ones. Contrapoints, although like, we'll get to her after. But okay, so like where I would disagree is I don't really think going down, getting out of the funnel is necessarily like going like more and more radical and then necessarily like doing something. Because look, I think it is better. I think all leftists should touch grass. I think that's just important. I also think ultimately we want to have a real effect. However, doing something isn't necessarily by itself always better than doing nothing. Sometimes it can be worse because there's a lot of pseudo activity. This is why I made the controlled opposition video. The controlled opposition video was like about how there's a whole industry in which people get sucked into activism and protest and burn out. And this meeting is a lot of people who've done a lot of organizing as well as older leftists. There's this experience of like burnout where, you get this out as a youth phase and then it's like you're tired because it's really exhausting. It's a lot of time and energy to commit yourself to. So it's like you better make it worth it, And there's a lot of pseudo activity. One can find themselves in kind of fringe orgs that, become micro sects that squabble with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can, actually there's forms of organizing I support more than others. I mean, like, look, I'm pretty biased in the sense that I think tenant and union organizing tends to be the best because it's like actually encountering with the people you claim to represent, as well as I think, or depending on the country in question.
Yeah,
like some
it's very
questions, I think,
Western oriented.
yeah, like some countries organizing with a political party that has an actual chance of like gaining seats is the way. In some countries like the USA where they're so far from that at all, I think the DSA is actually better because it's so big and you can at least like adapt accordingly to your area. Like the fact is there's not going to be an American unified socialist strategy given how different the South is, how different, Midwest, North, just like America's is so unique, man. Like that's kind of why the DSA model, I think, really does. It's it's not perfect, and it really depends on the people in which chapter you're in. But for a country like the USA, where it's so diverse, I mean, I prefer that approach just because there's this. I don't see in the US given the two-party system any possibility whatsoever of like a third party displacing, and also given the power of the state apparatus, you can kind of forget revolution. Revolution is only going to happen in America if part of the military sides, which I actually think would be more likely than siding, interestingly, if you look at the demographic
Yeah.
makeup of the military. And also just that's just something interesting. The US military seems to, from what I've seen in like polling, lean more progressive. Not necessarily like socialist, but it's definitely not like fascistic, right? And that is always a worry. But anyway, that's a whole other quagmire.
Yeah, because it doesn't want to. Yeah,
Big
it's still like it identifies with the American citizenry and doesn't want to turn the gun down on the American citizenry. But de facto, when it comes to non-American citizens, it is fascistic because you
Well, it's
being
definitely
part of
imperialist. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
part of
very, I'm
yeah.
conservative with how I use the word fascist, just because I think we're going to see, and we are seeing a rise of real fascists like, Fuentes and the Jubilee people. Like, those are real fascists.
Yeah.
I've been saying for a while, like, why we should not call like every right-wing populist a fascist, because they just are different. You'll start to see fascists when they adopt like socialistic language and mesh it with ultra racist stuff. Like,
Yeah, but
you
yes,
know,
but that I agree. But at the same time, you cannot be a member of the military which actively dehumanizes a foreign population and militarily intervenes without believing in the innate hierarchical superiority of both your state and your nation over the
oh,
people you are imperializing. So from that perspective, it is fascistic. Like
the thing
it
is,
absolutely is.
brother,
Yeah.
you gotta see. There's a whole like trend on like Twitter, Instagram. You could probably find it on YouTube too. But there's a whole thing where it's like people ask people in the military why they joined.
Oh yeah, everybody. I
And
know. I
no,
love the fuck. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's always
Yeah.
like
I'm talking about yeah,
money. Oh,
money.
it's
Yeah,
always like,
yeah.
oh,
I
I
was
want
broke.
school. Like it's
Motherfucker
always
lied to me.
it's
Motherfucker
mostly
promised me a
immigrants too.
Dodge. I want a Dodge, brother. Yeah. Like that was that. Yeah, it's yeah.
It's large percentage are immigrants too, right? Like, or minorities, poor people, who are just kind of
Yeah.
want free education or a way out.
I'm not talking about those
But
individuals being
yeah,
fascistic
the U.S.
by
military is
the
imperialist. I
definition.
mean, this is kind of
Yeah, the
self-evident. They're
systemic. Yeah,
facilitating a genocide. There are a
yeah.
million bases everywhere. Like, we don't really need to go over that. It's kind of
Cliche.
self-evident, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm so big on like the emphasis of U.S. change, just because I think like if any like any even reformist or revolutionary socialist project were to happen anywhere, America would try to stop it. So like, kind
Of
of have
course.
to have a change in the belly of the beast.
But you don't go down the path of like multipolarity and so on, right? I'm guessing.
Uh, well, I don't. It's not like I have a choice in the matter. I just don't
Mhm.
think that's happening. I wouldn't be against that. If China was based to build socialism and counter American hegemony, I hope that happens. I think that's
Yeah.
based. I don't really see that happening in terms of where most countries seem to be aligning themselves and where power seems to be going. I don't really buy the whole like,
Yeah,
look,
but that has always been the case, right? I might be coping right now. Probably I am coping for at least the next like
also,
70 to
what's the
100
point? Like, if
years.
we're saying, oh,
Mhm.
America is declining, you know what I mean? It's like, all right, like the thing is, we
But
should
it's
rely on the history of the like we shouldn't rely on just hoping things to happen, do you know? Like for
of
me,
cou-
this none of this changes organizing. Like whether or not
in the States and in Canada, maybe. It changes organizing completely everywhere else almost.
maybe, but maybe perhaps I don't know. I don't really see Russia, for example, like helping the left anywhere. I mean, they seem to be backing the right in most of Europe, far right
Yeah.
candidates like Marie Le Pen, right, and a lot of
But
these
that speeds up
fascistic
yeah.
types actually.
But that speeds up
Yeah.
the contradictions that exist inside of Europe proper. And
I don't know. I don't
furthermore,
think that's good. See, I think if I'm not accelerationist at all. Like, I think if we had a collapse of the systems in Europe and in America, you'd be way more likely to get fascism
it's yeah, but it's not
than America.
acceleration. Yeah, I agree, but it's not
Yeah.
accelerationist in any form. It's I'm really, for example, glad that Labour won in the UK, not because I think they're left wing under Keir Starmer, quite to the contrary, but because it
Mhm.
shows the wider population that there is no quote unquote real left in the country. That the reformists are just same shit, different package, which motivates the wider population to search for a genuine, true alternative to the current status quo. And yes, of course, real right wingers like the Jubilee people that you mentioned are going to eat up a very big part of that pie. But
Yeah, if the left
but
stays
communists
incompetent.
can eat up that pie as well.
Well,
So
it's
it's
the
not
thing.
acceleration. Like things need to
Yeah,
get worse
I know
before they
what you
get
mean. Yeah.
better. I'm literally pitching the opposite. I love reformists, Sotsdems, and so on. I love them winning because that, in my opinion, motivates and develops class consciousness even faster than the right winning and then all of us uniting against the right, etc., etc. When the reformists win and they don't do jack fucking shit, then people start questioning the idea that the reformists are the only alternative.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's some. Well, a lot of times that's true. Sometimes not. Sometimes
Of
true. But
course, every country
yeah,
is so
yeah, I
fucking
get your
different.
point.
It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. Yeah. So like, I think a big thing is also just the competence of the left, because I do place a big emphasis on agency. Like, I think a lot of the time history. I don't buy the great man theory of history. I
Of course.
buy to some extent the great group theory of history,
Yeah.
and that you can
But
have
that's what the funnel is. I
right.
want more people grass touching because there's a bigger chance of somebody who knows what the fuck they're doing being a part of an org or starting an org or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That because like
Right. So
what you mentioned earlier is like completely correct. I agree fully. But I think to address it is to throw more bodies at it. Like unironically, throw more bodies at it. More people interacting with the structure of organizations is going to make them less, just as you said, like fucking, just base, book clubs where they're just sitting there and fucking debating
so
whether
this
they
is
yeah.
so this yeah, I think this is where still there might be somewhat of a disagreement in the sense that I do
But
agree
okay, tell,
ultimately,
tell me,
like
tell me on what, Like I
yeah,
don't we
so
disagree. Like what's
show
the because you said
it's just
pushing everybody to organize is problematic because just organizing for the sake of organizing doesn't really contribute to anything whenever
I wouldn't even
those
say
organizations
against
aren't
organizing.
efficient.
Just
Aren't efficient. No, you're not against. I'm not. Sorry if I'm putting
yeah.
words in you. But like if they're inefficient, then it's another waste of time. The only argument I'm making is when you're developing the funnel, the stuff that you do, that I do, etc., we are trying to throw as many potential bodies at that particular problem, as many people that are going to potentially join said org, start, etc., that might change that very
Mm.
conundrum of organizing for the
Yeah,
sake
I
of
see what you mean.
organizing and just LARPing. That's the whole bit.
Yeah.
That's the
And
whole pitch.
I think there's an important place for that. I think that's a part of the funnel, perhaps. However, I think also is needed what needs to exist in the funnel, I think a big part of it, and I think that probably the part that lacks the most
Hmm.
is, throwing bodies, but with like guidance. So like what needs
Agreed.
once one gets a funnel, shouldn't just assume they have all the answers. In fact, I think it actually opens up way more questions the more you go down it. And what
It
tends
does.
to lack is like a serious like criticism, self-criticism, and
Hmm.
examination of preconceptions, because we forget like ideology is not just exclusive to capitalists or the right or the center or whatever. I mean, it's people on the left get very ideological. They'll believe all kind of things that like blind them to contradictions. And that ideology is a way to make sense of contradictions. So sometimes people come with very simplistic views or just don't question a lot of things. And as a result, um, not only do they repeat failures of the past, but also they fail to reach people, because this is the thing about reaching people. I'm critical of the idea that of like leftists, this idea of like we need to educate the masses. It's like, yes, I get your point. I think I agree, like wall posters, all that, yeah. But also like educate ourselves. Do you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Because no one, you can't like really reach people in a sense if you don't acknowledge part of what they believe to be true, or that you don't acknowledge the parts of what they believe that are true, or you have something that is so detached from what they believe that there's just no compromise there. And I think what happens, people get overly ideological and assume they have the answers. They end up being like, hello, my fellow workers,
Yeah.
like the Steve Buscemi meme. And they don't like, I see it all the time. Like, this is kind of where I want to make a part two almost of the contained opposition video. In my book, I call it's a subchapter of the same chapter on that, called the leftist industrial complex.
Mhm.
which is that there's a tendency towards self-marginalizing opposition. It exists on the right too, interestingly, parts of the far right, which is opposition that is self-marginalizing. It's a market phenomenon as opposed to state-controlled opposition,
Mhm.
CIA phenomenon. Like, when I say it's a market phenomenon is because while there's a market to also be like, the I'm a very different brand. Look at me. I
Mhm.
put I put MAGA and communist in two things, and I put Jefferson and Lincoln on a statue. Look at my brand. It's so different. I'm
Sprinkle
different
so
from
much gold
everybody.
on the burger, so much gold on my niche burger. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. Like that's a kind of tendency, but I also think there's another tendency of a lot of, leftists in general, but also people on the right. I mean, this is a market phenomenon
It
to
is, yeah.
tell people what they want to hear and not challenge that. To tell people it's actually very profitable. Like the easiest way I can make tons of money is just like, for example, if I just dunked on the right all the time, it will be so easy. Like for me, the
Easy.
reason I barely even do that is because I assume people who watch my at least the podcast, the channel, is bigger, but like the pod, I assume people who are listening are probably left leaning. So, what's the point in telling them already mostly what they know? So I'll try to at least bring like I mean, everyone likes to hear some of the stuff. It's inevitable. You're gonna recycle a lot of stuff. But to add stuff that is gonna enrich the understanding and also like self-criticism. Like I like to study like where different leftist movements went wrong, certain preconceptions that are in left circles that I think need rethought. Look, okay, I'll give you one example. You know what's a big leftist preconception that I think is a big obstacle to winning
Which
over
one? Which one?
people in the working class?
Give it
Well,
to
the
me.
idea of the left. Which is okay, so like what I found interesting about when I did a deep examination in Marxism, and I'm not an orthodox Marxist,
Mhm.
but I take inspiration from it.
Mhm.
I found it interesting that Marx and Engels would not ever refer to themselves as left or right. They would use the
Mhm.
terms left or right when criticizing parts of the left and right. And they saw what they were doing as beyond left and right, not in the kind of, Mussolini fucking pseudo whatever. But
Mhm.
like in the sense that it's ultimately workers versus capitalists, or if you were to broaden that category, because class is more, I'm more of a proponent of class politics. I don't think we need to stick to this kind of idea. It's only the proletariat because, it's
Fair. Mhm.
now into the peasants, right? So every country is different. I think we also have a much more complicated class structures
Mhm.
now than we did before, but still, I think class politics is ultimately where the power is at. And, that is, I think, more important. Like I always found a lot of people who come to my channel who aren't already leftists come from the Tupac video.
Mhm.
And they say like, I like that Tupac. You made it about like, it's not about, whatever left versus right. It's about the poor versus rich. I
Mhm.
used to hate this, by the way, when I was like in my peak, peak
Right.
ideological
Yeah.
communist. I used to
Yeah.
be like, "No,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
bullshit. That's just
I feel
you're
you.
trying. That's
Huh?
post-ideological." Saying that that's obfuscating this idea of the elites versus the non-elites, the poor versus the rich, the haves versus the have-nots. This is vague, but the problem is a lot of what is left is not really actually like necessarily leading to a politics that is good for the poor. In fact, there is, and it's not just now. So people might think like, okay, now you have like neo-progressivism. There's a lot of people who are progressive, but they're not really like anti-capitalist. They ultimately care
100.
more about, I don't know, like, let's be like, yeah, so, kids can do gender reaffirming surgery without their
Mhm.
parents' consent. That's like their big thing. Or I don't know, more diversity, whatever. There's all kind of like ways people can be progressive, but it's ultimately not really about like the class war. It's really not. And
They're doing
this
their
is
own niching. That's
Yeah, but this has a
yeah.
history because, like,
Of course.
there is a whole tendency. So it started actually in America, funny enough, because America left and right didn't ever really make its way into America like it did in France. It kind of happened differently in places. But in America, you had this progressivism, right, with like Woodrow Wilson,
Mhm.
and in England, it spread to England too, where and it's not just like because it's easy to dismiss Wilson as like because he was a white nationalist guy. He, while having socialist sympathies when he was younger, was the most extremely anti-communist, initiated the first Red Scare. But, progressivism filtered its way into a lot of left circles. Like, in fact, the British Labour Party, the Fabian Socialists, ended up embracing like this progressivist ideal, which embraced a lot of sketchy shit, by the way. Like, it was the people who were left of center back in the day who were more pro eugenics
Yeah.
than the right, because the right didn't believe in science. The right were like, we don't believe in science, whereas the left was like, we have the answers to everything. We can help Native people and we can help minorities by like alleviating them of the burden of bad genetics. I mean, it's really
Yeah,
spooky
yeah.
stuff.
Yep. Yep.
And it wasn't until like Hitler pretty much just ruined everything, where Soviet Union's more complicated. They embraced genetic eugenics for a while, but
Yeah,
then
yeah,
kind of
yeah. It's just
Lyshenkoism like kind of led to them abandoning it, but
yeah.
then also making other things worse. But then after Hitler, like with seeing what Hitler did,
The-
everyone was like, okay, this is fucked. We need to
even though, like, let's properly address it. Like, even after Hitler, they were unironically like, "Oh, we have this proto-Germanic minority. We just fought the Germans. The proto-Germanic minority we have in our country, not just the Soviet Union, other socialist experiments, is more prone to fashion. So let's take them and put them in Kazakhstan, or like let's just expel them from their land because German means Nazi." Like, absolutely, like it's cringe as shit. Yeah.
Yeah, and a big thing I think that's an obstacle is a lot of progressives have dogmas in that they assume that they have all the correct answers because they're atheists, and that people who believe in religion are inherently stupefied. And this is true of far leftists too. They'll take the Marx opium of the religion's opium of the poor quote, and try to say like, okay, well, at worst you'll have it like this looking down on them, like they're this backward. At best, which I still think is kind of a problematic view, which is, oh, eventually we're gonna like eradicate those views. And I'm actually very critical of that, because I think like the bad things about religion usually have to do with the structure or like the application of a certain ideas, not the idea of religion itself. Actually, I'm not a opponent of religion. This is one thing that me and Hakim, despite disagreeing probably on a lot of other things like Marxism, Leninism, would have very strong agreement. Because then Hakim's gotten a lot of hate for his defense of religion. I actually agree. I think part of the biggest reason why socialists failed much of the third world, especially in like religious areas, is because of mainly communists, is this rejection, this kind of atheism, this dogmatic atheism. I get it, like we should, not have church hierarchies and of that are like class hierarchies, right? The church
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah.
be a class hierarchy. It shouldn't be propagating anti-democratic, anti-socialist views. But it's like, and also I'm just not a fan of this idea like you want to forcefully secularize people. I mean, this was like some of the worst aspects of like Albania, did stuff like that. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a fan. And also, we should learn from the use of religion. There's some real use of a lot of ideas, like one, binding people together. That's religere. It's also in a lot of religious texts, there's a lot of wisdom that, Islam, Christianity, and even Judaism to some extent will share.
Yeah.
Like, we should like not be like, oh, because we're secular, science has all the answers. Like, there is wisdom in these texts. This is like the Bible is one of the greatest texts of philosophy ever written. That's what people had as philosophy for a long time. And I just like to be like, okay, Marxists sometimes have this tendency, and I've observed it, where they make it their own religion, and it's subconscious. They don't view it that way, but they like
They
will
do,
take
yeah.
historical materialism and views about history. It becomes a new kind of like master narrative for the
Cheat code.
universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The code. Yep. Yep. It's not everything you said with the example of religion obviously applies. They go overboard on almost everything else as well. Like art, for example, has to serve a material purpose in enlightening the working class towards pursuing the ideals of a workers' society. So we're going to ban cubism. We're going to ban interpretive art. We're going to et cetera, et cetera. Like all art needs to be a working man with a big sickle hitting a rock, and then surrounded by other beautiful people, which are holding a big red book and are looking up towards the sun. This, idea that you need to actively, in my opinion, that's the key word, of actively combating what you have preconceived notions about being quote unquote bourgeois or quote unquote reactionary without allowing things to take its own course ends up hurting the movement much more than arguably anything else. And when it comes to religion, like you said, hurt the development of socialism internationally, and I agree completely. But arguably, it also hurt the development of socialism everywhere else, including in the industrialized world. We gave for example, American reactionaries the greatest gift that keeps on giving up to today, which is a very simple pitch that almost always works. You talk to someone who is religious and showing some leftist leanings, etc., etc. The only way, not the only way, the easiest way to dissuade them from pursuing, class consciousness, different types of enlightenment, and so on, is simply by saying you are associating with an ideology that would shoot you because you are a practicing person of faith, right? And that was arguably, in my opinion, the main. That was like 70% of the Red Scare pitch in the United States. They're coming for your cross. They're coming for your way of life. And then the other 30%, again, brilliantly used by what I think both of us can agree are our opponents, quote unquote. The other 30% was they're coming for your family. Reinterpretation of rights for women as they want your wife to put
Well,
on a strap on and fuck you up the ass type shit.
that came
Relationship
from,
to
right?
kids, relationship.
You know where that propaganda came from?
The,
Because
the
that was
strap
in the
on.
well, they're gonna take your kids because that was the early Red Scare, the first Red Scare where that came from, and it's because it had some basis, not like I wouldn't say fully in reality, but in the sense that there was in a lot of communist circles, not all communists agree with this idea of like family abolition,
Yeah, yeah.
um, which is a complex debate.
It,
But
it, it, it-
the
yeah.
thing is Kollontai under the Soviet Union did do like collective child rearing, and it didn't work out very well, and it's why Lenin kind of canceled the whole project. Lenin was like a guy who's sympathetic to a lot of these ultra progressive ideas, but actually very skeptical. And I think
The problem
some
is
of
in the
Lenin's
speed
strength,
running.
actually think some of Lenin's greatest strength was his skepticism of uber progressivism, while being sympathetic enough to not just be like play into Russian Orthodox chauvinism.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
but he was also, cautious. I think this is the thing about like the conservative impulse that's important in just any politics that's useful is like, okay, you can only tear down a few fences at a time. You should also ask why you're tearing down a fence, what you're going to replace it with, because that's the big thing. What you're going to replace it with, that matters.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway, I don't want to completely
No,
cut,
no.
cut off
No,
what you're saying.
no, 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 no. You didn't. That's one of my favorite topics, honestly. Specifically, what you replace it with, and ignoring you call it the conservative impulse. I like to call it the reactionary instinct. Needs to be actively fucking addressed. We're fucking idiotic if we're not addressing it. The feeling, for example, of in group out group. Motherfucker, like that's as natural as I know, cringe all human nature, blah, blah. That's not the
Human nature is
consciousness.
real. It's just
It
it
is,
just
of
changes. It
course.
just changes, right?
It
It
changed
just changes, but it's still like it's real, right? Some people
absolutely.
use it as an excuse. They're like, "Oh, human nature is constructed, therefore we don't have to address it." It's like, yeah, like over like 200 years, human nature changes, but that's a lot of time,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And for example, that in group out group thing, which is a sentiment that will never be overcome when it comes to just what we are as fucking overzealous monkeys, can be utilized by a progressive movement. It should not just be completely rejected and forgotten and defined as something that we need to get above, because we will never get above it. A progressive movement, a socialist movement, etc., should utilize it for its own purposes. Very simple example: in group, out group. Instead of just leaving it to nationalists, leaving it to racists, leaving it to be utilized by herder, I am whatever, I am a white suburban American and you are a urban black person over in the United States, etc., etc. It, as it was very often with the internationalist segment of socialist movements, that to an extent we've kind of forgotten. And my last video was pretty much on this, which is a hyper utopian, hyper like end goal, end goal, end goal type of perspective. This the sense of pride for your in group can be utilized and should be. And there I make an argument that it should be utilized on the basis of species, Homo sapiens, etc., which can also be utilized as a borderline, I openly stated, violent mechanism to combat sectarianism, to combat ultranationalist thought, to combat even the idea that a nation state can exist, or the idea that we can naturalize quasi-scientific idea concepts like race, etc. So TLDR, I agree with you, utilizing a very real, very human, natural sentiments is necessary, and just pretending they don't exist, pretending that dudes aren't fucking, don't want to get a little bit violent, as they say, is only contributing to additional sabotage by the left as a general movement. That's it.
Yeah, so I remember when, I know this was just kind of like a slippage, but we all do it. We all do it, which is sometimes we say like left movement, a progressive movement, a socialist movement, as if these are all kind of like the
I know
same.
that I hate
But
it
I
as
know,
well.
it's
Yeah,
colloquial.
I gotta like, yeah.
This is for the audience
Yeah.
only. Like I know what you meant, so I'm not like I'm. That's the thing. What you mean a socialist movement?
Of course.
Thing is, though, is there's a lot of people in this so-called movement who don't agree. And look, it's easy to like have left unity, right? Well, it's not easy, but like the problem with left unity is you end up kind of what right wing unity had, which is like if you look at right wing unity, it was based around unity around a demagogue, Donald Trump, and like the American right. But ultimately, it's collapsing because the right is quickly realizing that they disagree with each other on so much shit. Like the right, you have these techno utopians like Elon Musk, and then you have these religious rightists who are kind of like anti-modernists. Then you get like race realists, and then you have the civic nationalists, neoliberals, neocons. Are all just very diverse group. Those are like, it's useful to address some of that, or else it kind of gets repressed, and then you have a collapse when there's not an out group to unify against, which is like, in the left's case, I think group and in-group are endemic to like human nature to some extent,
Of course, yeah.
which is why one has to be careful like what that group is. I tend to like, in the case, I think like sometimes the rich or like the elites is an easy one, just because its vagueness actually is somewhat of a strength, because it leads to less damage, but also it's closer to what closer to what a socialist politics is than this idea of the right versus the left, which I think, because the thing about the right and left, man, is like there's so much stuff that passes for left, and everyone can disagree as to say that's not real left, this is left. People have their definitions, but it's a relational term. People simply define themselves as left relative to the right. People define themselves as right relative to the right, to the left. You rarely see people on the right now call themselves rightists. You see people on the left call themselves leftists. It's a peculiar thing, because you look at like some of the contradictions that have come about, not just with like socialist politics or electoral politics, but like let's say Israel-Palestine. I'm going to bring it to that now, which is like Contrapoints, for example, and like people like herself who consider themselves leftists, which is who have like basically kind of defended Israel. They've basically criticized the left for being too radical on Palestine, and they, as they claim, sometimes they'll say it, too anti-Semitic. And look, the thing about Contrapoints is I would not say she's not a leftist. I'm not a person who believes in that, like the use or the policing the term leftist. She probably is, but you see like priorities. You really do see like where people's priorities are sometimes.
With Palestine, Israel, she got to a kind of crossroads. What do you mean by this? She has a shit ton of financial liberal supporters and a shit ton of, socialists that watch her stuff just preemptively thinking that she is in it for the cause or whatever, etc., etc.
If you've been listening to this so far and you're enjoying, I highly recommend checking out the second half on Patreon. It's part of a podcast that I do on Patreon only called The Backroom. If you sign up on Patreon for less than a Starbucks latte, boycott fucking Starbucks, fuck that shit. Become a patron for only $5 and you get access to, at this point, just about over 70 exclusive podcast episodes. Some of the best conversations, some of the juiciest conversations I have on this show take place only in the back room, and is ultimately how I keep the show afloat, you know? And we and Yugopnik have quite a fascinating conversation about all of the controversial topics, some of the stuff that, you only hear in the back room.
It's truly
See you
very
there.
gay.
Yes,
Nice.
extra.
Extra. G unit. Oh, that's awesome.
My only hope is that when enough people become pessimist, then out of despair somebody maybe does something. But you know why I also like to be a pessimist? Because it's the only way to have a nice life. If you're an optimist, then always bad things happen and you are always disappointed. When you are a pessimist, then you look around, okay, there are bad, but from time to time something nice happens and you are, as a pessimist, you are a little bit glad all the time, no?
You are listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.